This is Anna Patterson with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with organizational updates. So last Friday, March 14th was the last day to register for our 2025 Housing Day, our Advocacy Day at the General Assembly on April 9th. We're partnering with Habitat for Humanity of North Carolina and the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness. And a big shout out to Habitat for Humanity of Lake County. This has been a really great process so far. We have over 100 people signed up so far and representation from over 44 counties in North Carolina. So really, really glad to see a lot of familiar names, a lot of new names among those that have registered. If you registered and you have not received an email about our advocacy training, please reach out to us. We want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to attend one of our prep sessions before the big day on April 9th. Moving right along to federal policy and advocacy updates. I don't know about y'all, but we definitely were preparing for the worst. Weren't really sure what was going to happen on Friday. But in the final hours, Congress did end up passing a continuing resolution, and that averts a partial government shutdown. So on Friday, the U.S. Senate approved a stopgap spending bill to keep the federal government funded through the end of the fiscal year in September. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and a few of his Senate Democratic colleagues ended up voting in favor of the bill in an effort to provide the votes needed to avoid a shutdown. And many are saying while they did not agree with the spending bill, the shutdown would have been ultimately more detrimental. In terms of the continuing resolution, what it does is that it extends funding at fiscal year 24 levels and includes funding increases for just a few programs. According to our colleagues at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the bill will cut $13 billion, billion with a B, in domestic spending from the previous fiscal year, while also proposing some funding adjustments for several federal programs, including an additional $6 billion in defense spending and an additional $4.6 billion for some of the key HUD programs. We have included a chart outlining the different funding changes and notes for specific housing programs in the call notes, but I'll run through a few of them really quickly. The few HUD programs that saw funding increases, and there are a few caveats, so I'll make sure to mention those. Tenant-based rental assistance, TBRA, saw an increase of $3.65 billion. But here's the caveat. This increase is actually not large enough to cover the cost of voucher renewals and will result in the estimated loss of about 32,000 vouchers from the program upon turnover. If you've been listening to the housing call at all over the last year or so or more, every time we come upon this federal budget discussion, we highlight or we try and emphasize the fact that the cost of living is rising. And so what that means is the cost of administering programs that help people support or actually afford their housing. That means that cost of those programs also rises. And so when these budget increases either remain flat or fall short of the increase actually needed to sustain the current level of people receiving assistance, that means that people will lose their vouchers. That means that we will lose vouchers from the program. And so I just want to be very, very clear, make sure folks understand, although this plus 3.65 billion is critical, people will still end up losing their homes. Project-based rental assistance is receiving a $880 million increase. There's a $48.7 million increase for Section 811 housing, which is for people living with disabilities. And then there's a $18.4 million increase for Section 202 housing, which is housing for the elderly. Several HUD programs saw funding decreases, and that includes the Community Development Fund. This budget actually takes out funding from 4 congressionally requested earmarked funds. And housing funding and formula grant funding levels will remain the same as fiscal year 24 for the different pro housing programs. Homeless assistance grants saw a decrease, a cut of $168 million. So rather than calling for additional funding for HUD's homeless assistance grants programs, the CR actually gives the HUD secretary the authority to repurpose funds made available for the Continuum of Care program, the program to instead fund COC renewals. So instead of adding additional funds, it cuts funding and then allows the HUD secretary to repurpose funding from another program to fund COC renewals. Also, the bill does not include anything for disaster recovery, and that's something that we've continued to hear at the state level, trying to understand not only when our federal funding will arrive, because it has not arrived, but what additional federal funding, if any, will arrive. So that's an important note to emphasize, that no additional disaster recovery dollars are included in this continuing resolution. The continuing federal funding cuts and impacts of the Department of Governmental Efficiency, or DOGE, is still kind of ripping through the housing ecosystem. So we have several links in the call notes for you that talk about these impacts. We know that there are hundreds of affordable housing projects that are thrown into limbo after various contracts have been cut at the federal level. There have been a lot of affordable housing units that are threatened because funding that was already approved and slated for extending the life of aging buildings has been halted. And then there are other pieces that talk about what the actual real cost of cuts to HUD or USDA and the Treasury looks like for people, especially when it comes to housing and homelessness and operating as an organization. Moving on to state and local updates. Earlier this January, just want to revisit a lawsuit that Attorney General Jeff Jackson recently reminded folks about. He sued 6 landlords for allegedly raising rents by illegally colluding with property management software company RealPage. He released a video yesterday on March 17th where he revisits the case and kind of breaks down why this is an issue. He calls out RealPage and explains that the software uses AI to help companies collude and fix rent increases, which erases competition, and ends up raising rents to a level that is actually far outside the norm of what the market would have allowed for if it was done without AI. He explains that this issue is actually impacting at least 70,000 apartments in North Carolina, if not more. And 1/3 of all of the 1 or 2 bedroom apartments in Raleigh, Charlotte, and Durham, Chapel Hill metro areas are a part of the 70,000 apartment units that we know so far are impacted. This lawsuit actually began under the now governor of North Carolina, Josh Stein. However, in January, Attorney General Jeff Jackson actually expanded the lawsuit and broadened it to include larger real estate companies. Moving on to the General Assembly, we still have not had the first Disaster Recovery Act of 2025, Part 1, has still not passed and been made law. There was a meeting of the governor's advisory committee for recovery in Western North Carolina this past Friday, and several members of the General Assembly that were present mentioned that this week there would be votes to pass a hopefully more unified bill, because there were differences between the House and the Senate versions. And so we are kind of watching closely the votes this week to see if that HB 47, House Bill 47, actually does end up passing. Just a reminder, the key differences between the House bill and the Senate bill on the housing side is that rental assistance was eliminated from the Senate side. But then also of note, the small business grants program was also eliminated from the Senate side, and then other programs such as stream restoration and things like that were taken out. We want to highlight that the public comment deadline for the state's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Action Plan is March 20th. Please make sure that, especially our friends in Western North Carolina, make sure to check out and engage with this process. Our friends at the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center have a great primer that they've created, and we've linked in the call notes. The public comment deadline is March 20th. And for the city of Asheville, the public comment deadline for their city-specific CDBG-RDR action plan is April 3rd. Moving on to events. Also on March 20th, there will be a webinar hosted by the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard, talking about improving America's housing in 2025. Our partners over at the Southern Economic Advancement Project, or SEEP, on March 20th as well, if you want something to do before the Harvard webinar, will be continuing their series titled Uncharted, Navigating the Federal Landscape. And so this will be looking at updates on federal contracts and staffing and working with constituent services, as well as different funding impacts on nonprofits in the current political climate. Our friends and the Cape Fear Housing Coalition are having their legislative breakfast that they have each year on March 28th. So it'll be from 8 to 10 a.m. at the Cape Fear Realtors office in Wilmington. It is a free event, but registration is required. If you haven't been to this event, I highly recommend it. It's a lovely crowd, really great event, very informative. And I know I really enjoyed our time there last year. When it comes to reports and resources, the main one that I want to lift up for you all today is the GAP 2025. So every year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition releases a report titled The GAP. And it looks at the shortage of affordable homes, particularly for those low-income and extremely low-income renters. And it finds this year that the lowest income renters in the United States actually face a shortage of 7.1 million affordable and available rental homes. And so what this does is it leaves extremely low-income renters saddled with a larger proportion of the housing cost burdens. So nearly 87% of extremely low income renters are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and 75% of them are facing severe cost burdens. So they're spending more than 50% of their income on rent. And as a result, extremely low income renters account for actually 2/3 of all severely cost burdened households, despite them only representing a quarter of all renters in the country. So we have linked that report in the call notes for you. If you are wondering why we talk about cost burden the way we do and why we highlight this data, cost burden is one of the key metrics that we use to talk about housing stability and the need for affordable housing. When folks begin to spend over that 30%, over that 50% threshold, other things begin to suffer. And that creates a lot of instability and puts folks at risk of not only losing their homes, but of several other issues. There are a lot of other things in the news. We always link pieces that we hope you find relevant and timely. We have another piece talking about the intersection between children's health and affordable housing and high opportunity neighborhoods. That is a really good one to check out, as well as a link to understanding the latest state of the now repealed affirmatively furthering fair housing rule and what's taking its place in the interim. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time.